What's going on, guys? Back with another quick video. I got a silver Toyota in the booth. The sealer is drying. I'm gonna go ahead and give you a few tips on how I spray and blend silver with Spies Hecker. So let's get right into it. First things first, let's start on this blend fender. I like to do a sealer's edge, so put an edge of sealer so it matches my brand new panel that I'm covering completely in the sealer. I forgot to turn down the pressure for my air, so the sealer went a lot further than normal and where I would have liked it. So I'm gonna go ahead and give you a tip on how to do like a reverse blend, and then you can keep your blend really tight. So we're gonna try to blend kinda like this and just keep this whole front part, because they had a few chips that I filled in with like some UV spot putty and whatnot. So I would like to paint just this front part, and like I said, I would just like to leave my blend somewhere in here. And of course we have to take care of this section because of me getting too close to the adjacent panels. So first things first, make sure your sealer is completely dry. I like using these green Centauri Tack rags. What we're gonna do is we're gonna wipe this sealer, and what this is gonna do is this is gonna take off any dry overspray that doesn't need to be there. So this will help you get a good idea of where you need to put your base. Obviously it's not going to be a drastic change when you wipe it. It's not going to be like, you're not going to see the sealer disappear, but you will see some overspray, and that's just all the excess sealer on this panel that you did not need. So starting off with the wet bed, I like doing the wet bed at 26 PSI, the same way I do base coat. This is Spies Hecker. Different paint lines need different pressures, obviously. I like to use any gun for my wet bed. It just needs to lay it on there, you know, wet and uniformly. So I like taking my wet bed up to this sealer edge. I don't like getting this sealer too wet, because if you get it too wet, it can cause a splashing effect, and that's just where the droplets that land, they'll create craters and it'll look like tiny pinholes, and you'll notice it really bad when you go to clear coat. So I like to keep this area dry until I actually throw base on it. So like I said, I'm gonna wet bed everything that is not covered in sealer, and that's fully covered in sealer, like this dry spray of sealer. I'll go ahead and put wet bed here, because what we're gonna do is for our blend, for the most part, wherever we dry spray our blend, like doing an orientation coat and just letting the flakes fall on there, you wanna make sure those flakes fall into something really wet. Luma 3 Exodus, this is their 1.3. We'll be shooting this at 26 PSI. We'll start with almost an orientation coat, and we'll pull the trigger and get closer and closer to the panel as we get closer to our sealer's edge. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start really far back. We're gonna get closer and closer until we get to right about here, and then we should be able to just go ahead and paint it. We're probably gonna end up panel painting this, but this shouldn't be too severe because the color match really well, and people won't notice this panel paint as much as they'll notice something down here. And one of the main things with waterborne is keeping it wet, especially with silvers, and that's just so the flakes can lay down how they're supposed to and not stick up, which will be a lot noticeable, and they'll look like dirt. So I'll start with almost an orientation coat. Then I'm pulling the trigger more and more as I'm getting closer and closer. And then we're just gonna fan it out. So something like that. The reason why we do it like that is because we want to put the minimum amount of color here, since it's going to be panel painted. So since we're done with this blend, we can work on nothing but coverage, and then we'll orientate it, and orientation should cover up most of this dry spray from this sealer. So now I orientate the whole thing. And orientation needs to go all the way to the start of that blend. When you first started that orientation, when you very first started the reverse blend. Just want to let them flakes fall on the panel. All right, you just kind of want to look something like that. Obviously, you want to let it fully dehydrate and then look at it with your sun gun in here to make sure the blend looks okay, but you see how silky smooth it looks, and you don't see any dark spots. That's kind of what you're going for at first. in order to let it dehydrate. So we'll go ahead and finish the rest of these panels and the other fender, and we'll come back when it's dry. So unfortunately with this fender as well, we did the same thing. We got our sealer a little too close to our adjacent panels, so we'll go ahead and wet up the silver looking areas with wet bed, and then we'll go ahead and throw on base. Again, we'll focus on an orientation coat on these farther overspray spots, and then as we get closer and closer to the darker sealer, we're gonna pull the trigger more and more until we get directly onto the sealer, and then we'll spray exactly like normal. We'll start with that wet bed. Again, the purpose of wet bed is to keep the project wet during the whole time you're spraying. So sometimes on a more humid day, you could add less. On a drier day, you might need to add more. We'll start with an orientation coat. And we'll pull the trigger more and more as we get closer and closer. So now pretty much that overspray is almost all the way gone, so we'll just work on nothing but coverage. We're pulling the trigger all the way and fanning out as much as possible. So now we can just, and then now from here we can just work on nothing but coverage. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure if you really can see that, but that came out extremely, extremely well. Can't see that blend at all. Check out the other side. Looks extremely good. And you can tell from the tape how there's hardly any color, well there is color, but hardly any. And then it just shows that this panel won't be that far of a drastic change. Got some stripes in it, a little bit of modelly. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you how to fix that. Since my hood and my bumper are striped and kind of modelly, I'll just cut this base down 4-to-1 with wet bed, 1 part base, 4 parts wet bed, and then we'll go over this whole thing again, reorientate everything, and that should fix our problem. Another tip is if you cross-hatch your orientation, if you go one direction then another direction, it'll also take away them stripes a lot faster as well. And this is how that hood came out. After that 4-to-1 with that base and that wet bed. And this is how that bumper came out. It really helps cut down that base with that wet bed because it just helps thins out the metallics, preventing it from being so modelly so easily. So those are just a few tips and tricks for these silvers and metallics, from thinning out that base for the one with the wet bed and maybe cross-hatching those metallics and maybe using that reverse blend. And those are just kind of like things that have helped me out. It might not help you, but you can always just give them a try. We're gonna go ahead and use our Luma 3 Exodus, the 1.5 Spies Hecker 8600 high solids. And since we're all done with everything, we're gonna go ahead and give this 1.5 coats of clear. Back to back, no flash, you know the game. I appreciate you for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe.